Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything, from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Well, here we are, Season 6. I cannot even believe it. I believe this is our 84th episode or so. But today we just want to catch up on what's going on personally with us, what's going on in the news, just talk about things and kind of get situated. We got some excellent guests that Dee and I have been having conversations with during this break period. So they're going to be on the podcast coming up. So I think you're going to really enjoy Season 6. Good morning, Dee. How you doing?
I am doing all right. It's great to be back talking about what's going on. A lot of things happened while we were working on other things. And there were times when I was thinking to myself, maybe we should talk about this, but we're head down for a while, so we'll start kind of digging into a few topics today.
Yeah, it was kind of a crazy time. So we call it a break, but it really wasn't a break. Actually, what was going on was Demetrius and I had some pretty big projects in the pipeline. As you guys know, we own a company that supports people who are looking to bring user experience into their products, services, and things like that. And so we're always assisting them with these kind of big growth projects. And we had one that was really taking up a lot of time. We finally wrapped it. It gave us a chance to come back in with Season 6. Also, it gave us an opportunity to meet some other guests, talk to some people that we've known that we've been wanting to have on the podcast, and also have some interesting discussions with them about what the industry is looking like. But did you get any vacation time at all, Dee, or not
No.
really? No, yeah, I didn't think so.
Not at all.
Right? Neither one
I'm
of
on
us did.
vacation. What is that? What even is that?
I know. We need that. That was something we talked about. Actually, we had an interesting conversation, you and I, about mental health and stuff like that, because, we preach it. We've discussed it a little bit on the podcast, but it's really important to take a break and get away and have some perspective. And I happened to go away just for a very short little vacation up to Yosemite National Park from a Friday through a Sunday. And I definitely realized, and tell me, Dee, if you feel the same way, is that like there's something about the distance that matters. Like as you're like driving away from your home, your work, your responsibilities, whatever you want to call
Mhm.
it, being far away just somehow like pulls things into perspective and makes you relaxed a little bit more than just doing stuff super local.
Well, I mean, your environment does so much. And eventually, over time, the environment that you associate it with things like work and stress and other kinds of things, those are just constant reminders, and it keeps you in your perspective, and it keeps you in a certain frame of reference, frame of mind. And
Yeah.
exiting that and going somewhere else just kind of frees you up a little bit. It takes that away, so you're not kind of just the same old sights and sounds and smells and things. You keep bringing back the same thoughts. So it's a great way to get out, and I mean literally get out of your head and come up with something new and different and think
Yeah.
fresh.
I find it hard to be super thoughtful with not just the podcast, but with like clients and things. If I've gone too long without getting away and just like shutting it all down, like my
Mm-hmm.
like seeing like Yosemite, we got super lucky. I mean, it was like an absolutely gorgeous weekend. Wasn't too hot, wasn't too cold, super beautiful. Um, and fly fishing and hiking and biking and stuff like that. And it's like within 3 hours, and I was telling my wife this, is that within 3 hours I felt like the old me. Like
Yeah.
it was just like too much. You and I were doing too much. We were running a lot of projects. We ran I think we doubled the number of podcast episodes on Season 5. We just kept going and going and going.
Yeah, that was like the endless season. At one point, I was like, "How long have we been running this season? Does it make sense for us to take the break?"
Yeah, well, the funny thing is that I manage basically the structure of like what they call the editorial calendar for like putting things together on the podcast. And D usually just kind of rolls with it and was like, okay, cool. Like we're doing one tomorrow. We're doing one tomorrow. And the fact that he came to me and said, is this gonna like never end, or are we like this season is like twice as long as the previous season? And I think it is just we were in the flow. We had a lot to talk about. We love our guests and we love our listeners. And one of the things I wanted to point out to you, D, which you and I briefly talked about, but we didn't talk about in depth, is that we're kind of expanding globally on our listeners. So we're still trying to grow. We'd love everyone to share and let everyone know to listen to this this podcast as we try to do tech talk and have good, interesting interviews. But a lot of people around the world in different locations, Pakistan, uh, just India, everywhere is starting to listen to this podcast and enjoy it. So I'd love for it to continue to grow and hear from a lot of those listeners. So
Yeah, I think we bring a perspective that isn't heard a great deal. I think a lot of people, when they discuss Silicon Valley, a lot of times they're referring to like investment money and what VCs are doing, and maybe some bigger founders and things like that. But one thing that we try to represent is the perspective of the people who are actually doing the work, who are developing the product, who are getting things out in people's hands, and that a lot of times is going to be a bit different than what the investors are focused on. So,
absolutely.
and it's also, it's the area, it's the history. We grew up here in Silicon Valley, a place that has been synonymous with tech back before the internet even existed. Going back to when things were like the latest technology was a printer and a semiconductor and things like that. So that's all stuff that we grew up with. That's all built into our perspective, and that's one of the things when we look at what's going on in the world, like what we're going to talk about today. That's some of the perspective we're going to bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean, putting this into perspective, D, it wasn't that long ago, 1976, I believe it was, that my parents purchased their house. And when they purchased their house, they were waiting in line to purchase a house that was being built on farmland that used to
Yeah,
be here. I mean, that's crazy. If you visit Silicon Valley, you don't see farmland pretty much anywhere. And the
yeah.
fact is it was farmland back then. There was no Silicon Valley really. It was
Well,
just
even
beginning.
growing up, there were still orchards everywhere,
Yeah.
all over the place. Were in San Jose, where I grew up, there were still orchards everywhere, and then slowly over time, they all got replaced.
Hey,
But this
I have
all
a
used to
question.
be agriculture, and this all used to be farmland, some of the best farmland in the world.
Absolutely. I have a question. In because I haven't been there in a while, is that where the Bass Pro Shop is in San Jose? That used to be all farmland. Is that gone?
I haven't been down there for a while. I think there's one of the bigger orchards that used to be there is now a
Uh-huh.
park,
Oh,
if I
okay.
remember correctly.
Yeah, stuff changes really fast around here, and there's only so much
Hmm.
land, so it's like you see things kind of adjust quite quickly. But let's jump in and talk about what's been going on. Well, apparently a lot has happened since the last time we did a podcast. Last time we were talking, Elon was going to buy Twitter. Then I don't think he wanted to buy Twitter, and now he's buying Twitter again. So
Yeah, we
what's
just
what's
kind of
going on with that?
rewound a few months ago. It's almost as though the last few months didn't happen. So after all the arguments, all the back and forth, Elon saying that they're lying and the bots and it's not worth this anymore and all these kinds of things, he just went back to Twitter and made the offer of just resuming where he left off for the original asking price. Twitter stockholders approved it. So it felt a little bit as though um, it was a bid or a ploy, maybe to either get out or to get a discount. And then once it became clear that nobody was going to budge and was going to go into court, he basically just tried to walk everything back, which says to me that he didn't feel like he ever really had a case. It was just something that he was saying in order to try to move the needle.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that his lawyers probably realized that he wasn't going to win uh, in court, and there
Yeah.
wasn't going to be a way to kind of back out of it. It will be very, very interesting, and it'll be top of news for quite some time after he takes over. Like, what's going to happen with Twitter?
Yeah, I think that's the first thing that comes to mind for me is I don't think this is going to work out very well for anybody. Once I think this at the point now where we've gone through all these things, I think it's going to actually happen. I think Elon is going to acquire Twitter, and I think it's going to result in a significantly worse experience on a Twitter experience that isn't great to begin with. Ultimately, because you look at how Elon runs his Twitter account and sometimes Tesla and some other companies. And that now becomes the model because the culture of the company flows downward. So I think we're going to see a major shift in who is actually working at Twitter and how
Hmm.
they do business and the kind of the template and the model for how Twitter accounts are run. So I think you're going to see a lot more toxicity, a lot more arguing back and forth. I think this whole, we're going to uh, do this whole idea of now it's supposedly free speech, I think it just means there's going to be a lot more harassment and toxicity on the platform.
Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting because you know I read somewhere that that a lot of the people that they anonymously like interviewed said that they are going to look for other employment.
Oh
And
yeah,
then on the flip side, some recruiters were saying that a lot of other people that are at different companies were like, "Hey, I want to go work for an Elon company. He tends to like really push the barriers, super creative, blah blah blah." So I don't know. I honestly don't know. All I have to say is that as a user experience person, I hope in the grand scheme of things they can provide a better experience for the user. Right now it's a terrible experience on Twitter. I mean, pretty much every single person I've ever talked to said you go on, you post something interesting, and suddenly you're just getting bashed constantly and it feels makes you feel bad about yourself, right? Which is kind
yeah,
of the opposite feeling you want to have when you're interacting with a product, right?
yeah.
So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, just objectively, right? This is a situation in which a company is struggling to provide a good experience and also to properly monetize and to be profitable and to grow. And now it's being acquired by someone who is already running multiple other companies and has zero experience running a social company.
Yeah, it'll
So
be
if
it
you told me that and you didn't tell me any of the names involved, if you didn't
uh
tell me that it was Elon or if you didn't tell me that it was Twitter, I would look at that and say that that's not a recipe for success. But at the same time, who knows? There could be a surprise in there.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, like at the end of the day, I'm staying on the positive side of all these acquisitions and stuff. It's traditionally acquisitions that happen this way, where they're just kind of like, I just want that company. They don't work out as well. Like just traditionally, I'm not saying his won't.
Yeah,
It's just traditionally. Usually, the best acquisitions are the one where there's like a master plan of how do you like weave this company in, and how do you grow in a certain area and that kind of stuff. This one's going to be a big question mark, and I think there's going to be a lot of people tracking it. Now, I want to talk about the deal. So the deal itself was 44 billion. Is that correct?
that's what I read. Yeah.
The original one, right? At a stock price of $54 a share. Well, I mean, the evaluators, the Wall Street evaluators, said they look at this and it seems to be more like a 17 to $25 a share company. Like if you
Well,
actually just
it
truly
was
valued it.
trading at like 39 or 40 prior to it make before it looking like Elon was gonna buy it again.
Uh
So
huh.
it's 20%, a little bit over 20% above that. So I don't necessarily it's one of the things that was a little bit surprising to me and perhaps a bit telling is that when he went back and he made the offer, he didn't try to lower the price at all.
I'm shocked by
Which
that too. Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't come back and
yeah,
say, "Hey, I'll give you, 30 a share or something."
yeah, or even just at maybe like 10% or 5% above the current share price, right? Like it's a little unex. To me, it says that he didn't expect to get that because he felt like he had no leverage.
Hmm.
Uh, it seemed as that's just me reading between the lines. I have no internal knowledge of that. Just for somebody to come back after going through all of this, delaying it for months, having to now go out and resecure different financing because some people have left, and then all of the difficulties that are involved. The prime rates going up, so interest rates are going to be different on the loans that he's getting in order to buy this. This is in a lot of ways would have been much more favorable for him to secure it and complete the purchase months ago rather
Hmm.
than to do it now. And for him to come back and say, "Okay, I'll just ignore everything that's happened over the past few months and I'll go ahead and buy it," it just seems like it seems like an L for him, to be honest. So
Yeah.
uh, we'll see if he can turn it around. I don't think it's. I think what will tend to happen. My prediction is that we'll see a lot of people leave the platform. We'll see competing platforms pop up, and they'll either follow this model of just being all things for everybody, like Facebook and Twitter and kind of early social media has been,
Hmm.
or it'll be a little bit more focused and be this is a platform for certain things, and we'll see more different ones. And that's more like what Instagram and TikTok are doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things here I wanted to mention. Number one is that the financing is actually going to be a little bit of a challenge for him because right after he announced that he was going to basically buy it again or forced to buy it, his Tesla stock crashed.
Yeah,
And because his Tesla shareholders are very specific shareholders, they love SpaceX, they love Tesla, they do not like Twitter. And so they're concerned that he's going to have to sell a ton of his stock in order to pay for this Twitter acquisition. Okay, so that's one thing that they're not happy about. It takes up extra time. There's many reasons. One of the things I did hear through the pipeline that he has been considering that other people have talked about is Twitter's not just Twitter. Twitter is a potential API that can be integrated into a lot of different software packages. And basically looking at it from the perspective of like, what if you broke it into pieces? Like maybe somebody integrated the Twitter stack inside of software related to employment, and then you can use that to kind of search for certain employment information or whatever it is. So I heard that there's a lot of creative thinking going on about what to actually do with it. But I think if they try to turn it around, I think you're looking at a 5-year horizon. So he has to
Hmm.
basically service those loans and take care of all that for the next 5 years. And with a company that's basically underwater.
Well, I mean, you brought up Tesla's stock. It's down. I mean, if you look at it, it was around, it was closing in on $400 when he started making these, the first overtures to purchase. And now it's looking at, as of the time of recording this, it's at $200 roughly, a little bit
Yeah,
over
it's like
$200.
205 or something. But
Yeah.
like I think part of that too is the fact that things slowed down a little bit with the earnings call and
Sure.
everything. But definitely the second that he announced the Twitter thing, it was like tank.
Oh yeah, it's definitely tanked. And then he had, a bunch of other things. He had the uh, sexual misconduct allegations, all those kinds of things. So, just the context, though, is that at the time that he made this, he was the world's richest man, and I'm pretty sure he's not anymore. And he's also taken loans against his Tesla equity. So now that equity is worth a little bit more than half of what it was
uh,
at the time that the loans were issued, that creates a lot of just financial pressure on it. And
yeah.
I think that those are all things that you don't necessarily want on somebody who's trying to rescue a platform that is struggling, because it influences the decisions they make. And I think it's one of the reasons why, if you look at what happened to Facebook after their IPO, and when they first had their IPO and it was a different platform, there wasn't much advertising, it
Hmm.
wasn't as toxic as it was at the time. And then they started having to focus on monetization, a lot more advertising, a lot of started promoting different things in order to, it's basically like the dark side of the forest. They went the easy path in order to rescue themselves financially. I could see something similar happening with the experience of Twitter, where they're
Hmm.
going to try to emphasize things that are sensationalized and just toxic and negative in order to get more engagement, because people engage more when they're angry,
Hmm.
and that could permanently damage what the will be on Twitter, and it's already, like we said, not a good experience.
I would be more likely to bet on him for Twitter if he didn't have 5 other companies he was running.
Yeah,
No, seriously.
I
Like
mean,
if you
I
look at it, it's a great challenge for a guy like Elon, right? Like meaning
mhm.
like he loves like, oh, I'm going to take on an industry that everyone else has failed at, right? Like that's what he does. But he's got 5 other companies, and 2 of those companies are so prominent that they require the majority of his time and require a ton of attention. So if he didn't wasn't doing those other companies, if SpaceX and Solar City and Tesla and all that stuff didn't exist, I'd say, hey, like if
Yeah.
there's anyone that should go at it, it should be him and see what happens.
Well, he's trying to turn this company. He's trying to turn Twitter around at the same time that Tesla is hitting a 52 week low that is 50%, less than half. Apparently, looking at it now, less than half of what the 52-week high was.
Yeah, yeah, it's
So
a tough time for him financially
yeah,
to pull that off.
Tesla needs the attention, and and Twitter also needs the attention. So it's and I, there is a chance that he will just um, appoint a CEO to
Yeah,
run Twitter, but that hasn't really been his style. So it kind of gets back to kind of the Jack Dorsey days of a part-time CEO.
yeah, I think he will though. D. He does have a CEO for Neuralink, and
Hmm.
with this one, yeah, I think he's going to find somebody to do it. That if I had to take a guess, I'd say he'll appoint a CEO. He'll be the chairman of the board, and he'll help with product. And that's what I'm
Yeah,
guessing is going to happen.
that would be their that I think is the best course of action. Ultimately, I think Twitter needs a significant overhaul, and a lot of the things that he's mentioned, we discussed it in a podcast a little while back. Some of the things he's mentioned make a lot of sense. You know, edit buttons, things like that. Let's make it happen. I think you
Uh-huh.
can edit now. I'm not sure. Um, I think they just announced that after people asking for it for like a decade. Uh, they are, but I think it needs a significant rework, and a lot of that is around not just content moderation, but just encouraging good behavior. Not necessarily. That's the flip side of the coin. Of aside from just removing content, there is still just setting the tone, setting the good example, showing super positive, uplifting, good experience content on there as the example, and just and internally or in some ways promoting that, so that becomes the de facto for the experience on the platform. And
Yep.
I don't know that that's anywhere within his roadmap. It's not something that he's mentioned anywhere.
I don't think he has a roadmap right this moment. If I had to take a
Yeah,
guess, I would say he's going to start creating one this week. I think
yeah,
actually I heard that it's within 2 weeks from now, it signs over.
yeah.
Like it happens very quickly.
Yeah, if I had to summarize my takeaways from the things that I've seen that he plans to do, quite a few of them I think are good ideas. Quite a few of them are things that should be done. But I also look at it and say none of these are things that are going to turn the platform around and make it a good experience.
Absolutely. Well, on the flip side to that, let's
Oh,
talk Parler. So, D, tell
well,
us what's happening with Parler. I mean, we're
so the
sending
first
this
thing
to
that
you.
came to mind when you said that you like to be positive about all these acquisitions was, well, what about Kanye and Parler? And I still call him Kanye. I know he changed his name to Yee, I guess.
Yeah.
And
See.
I usually try to respect, okay, you want to be called a certain thing, that's fine. It's like with Muhammad Ali, right? If he wants to be called Muhammad Ali, I'm going to call him Muhammad Ali, and go back to what they said in Coming to America about, his mama named him Play. But this, when he changed his name, it felt a bit more like a marketing thing. So it's buying Parler, which seems a little odd. Parler is a company that's not doing well. It has lost more than 80% of its user base in the past year, going from 5 million users to under a million. And it is also not allowed on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store after it was found that extremists had used Parler to plan the January 6th kerfuffle. And I don't see Kanye coming in and saying, okay, we're going to clean it up, get us back on the App Store, get all these things done. He doesn't seem like an organized thinker at this point in his life. And he also seems to be really embracing this idea of, I'm going to kind of be the male Candace Owens, where I'm going to say a lot of things that seem specifically designed just to court the right wing sentiment. So in some ways, that's his new brand, and Parler seems to go with his new brand. But he's also going to be facing competition from Trump's Truth Social, which is also struggling, and now Elon's Twitter, which very much expect to take a right wing turn. These are all platforms, including Parler, that have struggled financially. I don't think that having a non-mainstream user base for social is going to be an economic winner, and I definitely don't think it's going to be an experience winner. Most of the mainstream user base is going to stay in places like TikTok, where they are having some financial success, even though there is a bit of a
Mhm.
downturn recently. It's very much like, is this even going to happen? So
Well,
what
it's
are
supposed
your
to
thoughts
close
on it?
really soon. So I think it's supposed to close in November. And
Yeah.
so I imagine that at some point it's going to be Yi versus Elon versus Trump. So the three of them are just going to be competing for users. That's pretty much all it's going to end up being. And actually, the only winner out of this acquisition of Parler is the founder,
Oh
because the
yeah.
person gets to walk away with a bunch of cash. Like honestly, like you're looking at a company that has dropped so much in value, and let's be fair, like they were they didn't do themselves any service, right? Like they're basically saying like, oh, we're the free speech side, we'll do whatever we want. Well, look what happened because of that. And do you really think that just having a celebrity come in and take over is going to really change anything? But honestly, why does he care? I mean, the CEO is going to be able to walk away from this and say goodbye to it and not have to deal with anything ever again, right? And so that's essentially
Yeah, I
what's
mean,
happening. My guess is in
Parler always felt like pandering to me, and
yeah.
there are plenty of accounts like Kara Swisher's, I think, or if not Kara Swisher, somebody kind of in that vein who's kind of a journalist. Plenty of people have been removed from Parler for saying things, so it always seemed as though the whole idea of it being a free speech platform was hollow, and it was more just pandering to kind of the right wing groups. And it was someone who took, honestly, it felt like somebody took a look at it and said, all right, all of these people who are getting removed from mainstream platforms need a place to go. So let's
Hmm.
go for the long tail and build a platform for them. And
Yeah.
they thought it was going to be easy, and it absolutely is not. We've definitely had conversations with people who work at Twitter and Instagram, and just the sheer logistics of managing that much content going back and forth is a huge challenge. It's difficult to monetize, and it's difficult to kind of balance the books and come out in the black. And for a company like companies like Twitter and Facebook are facing challenges getting into profitability, then it's really difficult for a company like Parler or Trust or True, what is it called,
Truth
Truth
Social.
Social, with a smaller user base, less attractive to advertisers, and less, honestly, engineering talent and design talent in order to create a good experience and to get to a point where the company's making money and doing well.
Can you think of two instances where a non-tech person, meaning non-engineering design, whatever it is, like deep into the tech trenches, came in as a CEO of a tech company and was able to successfully like skyrocket the company?
I imagine you're going to tell me some. Some people might say Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs was always deep
No,
into
he was
tech,
in
even though
tech. Yeah.
he didn't get the degree, and he had a fair amount of design knowledge. He wasn't an
Yeah.
engineer, but he had a good amount of design knowledge, and he just came in with very strong business practices also.
Hmm.
Um, GoPro, I would say maybe, but that's someone I believe grew up around tech and
Well,
um,
well, Nick Woodman, the CEO of GoPro, got his degree in design and it's previously
yeah,
started a tech company prior to GoPro. So he
yeah,
had strong tech experience.
yeah. So, do you have examples of
All I
people who've
can
done
think
well?
of, and I could be wrong on this because I don't fully know the management team, but like Beats by Dre, right? Those ended up
Uh,
really those were done by I believe
that was
audio.
Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine, and they were working with. They actually started off as a subdivision of Monster.
Oh, okay, so
Um,
that doesn't count then because that now you have all that tech talent on your side. So let me try to
Yeah,
think of
and I think of them as an audio company. I don't really think of
yeah.
them as like a true tech company. I mean, the technology that went into Beats is very old. It's basically they just took kind of a headphone amplifier, integrated it into the headphone itself, so that you could run higher or lower sensitivity headphones off of normal sources. Right, that's why you had to put a battery in them. So it was they were taking kind of or lower sensitivity uh, headphone drivers that need
Mhm.
more power, and then giving them power through a battery rather than through the output jack on your phone,
Yeah.
and then tuning it to what Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre had to say about tuning.
Yeah, it was
So,
it was
but
a smart move. I'm just saying I'm
it
trying to
was
think I'm trying to think of just like the founder or the person who acquired the company just doesn't have like institutional knowledge in that category, right? So like even when you hear of like Hollywood companies buying Hollywood companies, they're always led by somebody who's been in the industry or deeply understand the industry. And so I can't think of too many, right? I mean, I can't think of any
so.
at this moment,
I
that
think I think Meg Whitman um, before she took
eBay.
over eBay, didn't really have a background. I'm looking at it now. Yeah, she was. a brand manager at Procter and Gamble, vice president of strategic planning at Walt Disney. She worked at Hasbro and Play School, Mr. Potato Head. Yeah, she didn't really have a tech background before she took over at eBay,
Yeah,
but
but
at
she
the
was an
same time,
incredibly talented operator who has a
yeah,
ton of
that was
experience in business.
the other thing was that was in 1998.
Yeah,
So,
things were different. Yeah,
that's yeah, things were different. That was over 24 years ago now.
yeah,
So that's going to be a
yeah.
little bit of different
What
context.
I'm trying to point out is that it's not that easy. Like the
No,
amount of things that emerge from a tech company, it's so hard. Like people ask me all the time, they're like, "You work with every tech company that's out there," and I always tell them, "Let me tell you, if you're a non-tech company trying to compete with a tech company, you better really up your game because it is a 24-hour, 7-day a week battle for positioning. And these are some of the smartest people in the world putting their tech talent basically into building this new infrastructure, this digital infrastructure. And to come in and just be like, yeah, I'm going to buy this company and stuff. It's like you better have some operators on there that really know what they're doing and how to run a tech company, how to scale a tech company. Because he comes from fashion and design and music and things like that, which is great for bringing that into the company. But like, could you bring in that company by being a board member or being a brand ambassador or the head of product design or something like? Did you need to buy the whole company? You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like I just think of it differently.
And the natural response to all of this is, well, you can just bring in a CEO who knows what they're doing, and that person can run the company. Well, that actually presumes a few things: is he qualified in order to evaluate a CEO and determine who would be a good CEO?
Yeah.
What CEO would be willing to take on this challenge? Not to mention all of being the face for a very controversial movement right now within the MAGA and the right wing experience currently. And just even if they are qualified and they're willing, it's such a huge challenge. It puts them so firmly behind the eight ball because of where they are. This is a platform that's not allowed on the App Store or Play Store.
Yeah, the biggest move forward for anyone who coming in would be number one, how do we get it back on those? Because if you get it
Mm-hmm.
back on those instantly, you get user growth and retention, right? Potential
Yeah.
retention, but like user growth, right? So like that's the very first thing that they're going to have to focus on and stuff. I don't know. I think all these social companies, if they all move more toward the right, all they're going to be doing is talking to themselves.
Well, they're fine with talking to themselves, but can they even talk to themselves? I mean, the to the extent that there is a market, it's fractured, and so some of them are going to be on Twitter, some of them are going to be on True Social, some of them are going to be on Parler. Some of them, I mean, Gab is still out there too,
Oh, I didn't even
and
know that. I haven't even been
yeah,
tracking it.
I mean, we don't think about it very often, but they're still out there, and there are others too. So I don't see this coming in and becoming one of the things about the long tail is that unless you're running super, super, super lean, which is really hard to do with a social site like this because of the amount of because you're so dependent on populating it with people in order to establish content, that it's if you're going to run the long tail, you have to either run incredibly lean and have like 10 employees or something, or you need to really capture a majority of the market size that's there. It's
Yeah.
hard to go long tail and to be third in market share and be
It's
successful.
true. It's true. I mean, you're pointing out all the obvious things. I think where you and I potentially fall short is something creative that comes in that none of us thought about, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that shakes up kind of the whole industry and how it functions and that kind of stuff. I don't see that happening anytime soon, based on my research, but hopefully, things will straighten out to a point where some of these will disappear and the good ones will rise to the top, and like every other business out there. But I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to we've been talking about this for a while. I wanted to switch topics. Our final topic of the day is a lot of people have been concerned about these layoffs that are happening in tech right now, in consolidation and acquisitions, just a lot happening. And I wanted to kind of give our personal opinions on this. So definitely, like you've heard about this, like Netflix, Snap, Lyft, Peloton, Facebook, Microsoft, Tesla, everyone's like laying people off. what they're doing is they're trimming down the amount of staff that they had that they ramped up during a time period when the stock market was going nuts, and they were doing stock sell-offs and making tons of money, and everyone was at home and spending all their time on digital and all the stuff that Dee and I have talked about. We've seen this before, what, two or three times during periods where we're heading into a potential recession and things like that, where they'll kind of just trim the staff a little bit, and everyone will have to work, unfortunately, a little bit harder to keep their jobs. And a lot of times they don't refill those jobs, which is kind of a bummer. But I want to point out it's also a very interesting and kind of positive time sometimes as well, because you see a lot of consolidation within tech that needed to consolidate. So you'll see companies that are grabbing, let's say, 2 or 3% of the market share where someone else is grabbing 15, and then they'll acquire them just to kind of create growth. And so you'll look back in, like, let's say 2 years from now or 3 years from now, and you'll go, wow, a lot of those companies that existed no longer exist. They're now part of either bigger companies, or these small companies emerged and got huge because they picked up 3 or 4 small companies and decided to compete with
Yeah.
the big guy. So it's kind of an exciting time in that sense. Like, obviously, I don't like people being laid off. I don't like people having to lose their jobs. None of that stuff. I mean, we lose contracts because of this stuff.
Yeah.
But from the bigger picture of just looking at it, these are healthy things that happen within consolidation that could lead to some crazy new companies emerging in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I look at this a little bit within the context of the pandemic, in which a lot of these companies, like Netflix and Peloton and Facebook probably and Microsoft most likely, all had massive spikes in demand that affected their companies during the pandemic because people were at home. So we saw significant growth for all of them during that time period. And now that the pandemic is ending, we're seeing the demand shift going back to where it was. If you look at like stock price and revenue, it's kind of returning to just a bit more than what it was before the pandemic. So it's
Yep.
if you look at a graph of stock price and revenue, and you kind of cut out the pandemic, you can draw a line from pre-pandemic to now post-pandemic, where it's as though it kind of underwent normal growth. So, but during the pandemic, when all of this was happening, a lot of these companies staffed up in order to kind of try to meet demand, to strike while the iron was hot. And one of the sad things is a lot of people who were there, because of difficulties in staffing and because of the worker shortage, they worked long hours. They worked extra hard and extra long in order to meet the demand and keep the company strong. And then now that revenue and stock prices are starting to come back to earth, a lot of companies are saying, I believe, are looking at this and saying, if we can trim our costs when it comes to our quarterly earnings, we can try to buoy our stock and keep it higher. So I honestly, I look at some of these companies like Tesla. I don't think Tesla or Netflix needed to lay people off. I
Uh-huh.
think that they saw the stock price go up and they wanted to try to keep it as high as possible. So in order to do that, they were looking at people who were non-essential, even if they were people who worked incredibly hard and put in the extra effort during the pandemic, and decided, all right, well, if we remove those costs from our balance books, we can provide more favorable numbers during earnings reports, and that can help to boost our stock. And that's one of the things that one of the ways in which I look at what's going on.
I think this is one of those almost slightly panic moments sometimes for
Mm-hmm.
for companies where they go like, oh, things have been so good, I want them to keep going really, really well for a long period of time, even though they
Yeah,
know that something's coming. And it's clear that we're going to have a global recession. I mean, it's just day after day, like, as these interest rates go up, we're seeing like markets tank, and like housing markets starting to level off, all this kind of stuff. So some event is going to occur, and I think the companies are preparing for it. But the point I'm trying to make, I think, the grand scheme of things, is that it's sometimes a natural progression that happens. And a lot of times you end up having a really good outcome in the longer run, even
yeah.
when it's slightly painful in the short run. You know what I mean?
Well, I've been on the record about being a little bit more skeptical about a recession in the middle of this. You don't usually see increases in the Fed rate going into a recession. It is possible that by overreacting to what's going on, it could tip things over into a recession. But one thing to keep an eye on is, despite all of the layoffs nationally, we're still at 3.5% unemployment rate, and that
Yeah.
is tremendously high, or tremendously low, I should say,
Yeah.
for the possibility of it would be unusual historically to tip into a recession with unemployment rates at that level.
Yeah, I think the only thing is like now we're starting to see savings rates start to go down. All those triggers of like making the economy harder on everyone. Like we look at
Hmm.
inflation, you look at interest rates. It's like they want spending to slow down, all that kind of stuff. You're starting to see it, and so like you said,
Yeah,
they can't trigger it. They can't force it basically.
yeah, they could make it happen, uh, but spending has been incredibly high recently, as far as like individual consumer spending has been incredibly high. People had money. People were putting money into, there was the wealth creation of the spike in investment markets that now people are liquidating and they have more money to spend.
Yeah,
So that is obviously what drives inflation. And at the same time, we've been in what has been referred to as the era of free money since 2008 with the Great Recession. There were a lot of basically stimulating financial actions that were taken, that are ultimately inflationary. And this is, you look at the inflation map worldwide, almost every country in the world is going through inflation because during the pandemic and after 2008, everybody engaged in super low interest rates, basically the era of free money. That stimulated all the investments that drove up the investment prices. So then people had a lot more money, and it has shown a little bit of a lack of discipline of getting back to kind of reasonable monetary policy for all, across the board, basically throughout the world.
yeah, and we're gonna have to go through that pain of that discomfort that usually lasts for a couple of years. And
Yeah.
the one thing I want to say before we wrap up is like this is actually a good place to wrap because our guest next week is a venture capitalist who's going to talk about what is actually happening from his perspective of someone who invests into small businesses. So, um, so for everyone who's listening, stay tuned for next week's episode where we do an interview with a VC who talks about what does it mean to be a VC, what kind of money is sitting on the sideline, what is that process like, and it's a very thoughtful conversation. So, all right, everyone, this is a wrap for today. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to us. We really appreciate it. As I always say, we're going to post those links to anything that we discussed on Twitter at the X Podcast One. That's the X Podcast and the number one. If you like this podcast, found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you tell all your friends, subscribe to the podcast, send us emails. We love it. We love hearing from everybody. So thanks a lot, and we will see you all next week.